everybody. This is a call to order for the Nags Head Planning Board meeting, Tuesday, November 21st. First order of business will be to approve our agenda.
Can I make a motion to
Please.
approve that said agenda?
We have a motion?
Second.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Moving on then to public comment and audience response. Looks like we have someone who'd like to join us. Just please step up and give us your name.
Hi, I'm Dave Shufflebarger, live in Nags Head in Old Nags Head Cove, and I'm just your cheerleader today. Say thank you for the thoughtful and balanced way you're going about working on workforce housing. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, sir.
Wow.
You can
Thank
come back.
you.
Thank you.
You can come back anytime.
Can I cheer your response as well?
Yes.
Yeah, it's rare that we hear that we're doing it well. Often it's the opposite.
That's correct. Well,
yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Does anybody else want to say anything great about it? Oh, you're the only one here. Okay. Well, anyway, thank you very
If
much.
he
All
wants to-
joking aside, we do appreciate it. And
Nice to hear
we're
from more times.
open to hearing other things too, if you ever have suggestions. Okay, so we'll move on to the approval of our minutes from the October 17th meeting.
Make a motion to
We have a
approve.
motion to approve.
Second.
And a second. Everybody in favor? Any corrections, adjustments?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, moving on to our action item for the day.
Did you
Which
say
is-
that was a singular?
That's right.
Isn't that great?
You think?
It's a big act.
And it's just a little light,
It's just, you know,
little light piece of business, so,
it
you know.
shouldn't take a few minutes.
Yeah, I think we'll get right on through it. Okay, good. Well, I would like to probably get it to a point, I think we all would like to get it at least to a point where it's right on the verge for
Well-
staff to present to us.
That was when we get to that, maybe before we start where we want to go. Because it's going to, what does it need to look like at the end? You know?
Right.
You know, to get it to a point where there's a lot there, and we're at the point right now where it's in, out. And I think that if we discuss that at the beginning, maybe it'll be a little less difficult to get into the weeds, or more difficult to get into the weeds, because the minutia sometimes takes me into those weeds.
No. That's not, okay, good. Well, we'll let, Kelly is gonna present.
Yes, so, I'm not actually sure the best approach here. I've made little bullet points of the revisions that have occurred between the last meeting and this meeting. And then there's the actual location within the ordinance. So I guess for right now, let's kind of focus on the ordinance language. And I can just use my staff report to talk about these bullet points, and then we can navigate through there. So there probably is really no good way other than to take it point by point. So I apologize. And we can discuss each point if we need to. So the first revision is that the proposed definition of multifamily development has been revised. It no longer speaks specifically to townhome and apartment style developments. And what we've done is we've added that into section 6.6, the table of activities and uses. So before, the proposed definition of multifamily dwelling had some language in there about how townhouse is considered multifamily, and apartment style would not be permitted as a principal use. So that was what your first version had in it. So we've since eliminated that and put some terminology related to townhome and apartment style uses in section 6.6. And so we'll get down to that as well. The definition of long-term occupancy, we revised that to reflect that that's going to be a stay that is 90 days or greater. Before, we had 91 days. So that's been revised. For the definition for workforce housing, we removed terminology that said workforce housing shall not be subject to income or salary limitations or the number of hours worked. So obviously, that was the consensus of the planning board and the board of commissioners from the workshop, and that's where we're at with that. But there's also no reason that we just couldn't be silent on that. It didn't need to be addressed within the definition. So we went ahead and removed that. And then we talked about how we did want employers to be able to potentially purchase some of these workforce housing units for their employees. So we got rid of the section that speaks to an entity not being able to purchase the units. And we added a note that nothing in the definition shall preclude an employer from purchasing workforce housing units to provide accommodations for their employees, provided that the employees work within Dare County. Additionally, we added a subsection C that relates to deed restrictions. So now's a good time to tell you guys that yesterday, once we made these revisions, we did send it to Robert Hobbs, who works with the attorney's office for the town. And he reviewed it last night. He came back to us this morning with some comments and recommendations. So even beyond what you see today, there's going to be some recommendations that we received from the attorney. And one was specific to the deed restrictions. Those need to specifically be spelled out in ordinance form. So we're going to need to actually put those in here. And obviously we don't have that at this point. So that's going to be one thing that's lingering that we're going to have to get back to you. But we did put the note in there that the property or the housing would need to be properly deed restricted. So we already know that's an area where there's going to be more information coming back to you with regard to that. All right.
I have
yeah,
a
jump in.
question.
Yes.
I have a question before we continue on. The workforce housing, we were talking about a natural person, understand that, employed, Dare County, understand that, but engaged in educational opportunities and internships and volunteerism. Volunteerism is work, I understand that, but are we looking college students here?
That was a conversation we had, I guess, a couple meetings ago, but the thought there was to be if we had some students from CSI or someone, you know, here for the summer doing some work, that they would be able to utilize this workforce housing as well. So someone having an internship, someone that's part of a NGO or something like that, this would be capable of accommodating them as well. But I mean, if we need to discuss that now would be
A good time.
yeah.
Yeah, I can defer that. I just wanted to throw that out, that I have a concern about that, considering the fact that so many people that are actually looking for a place to live and working here can't find places to live. So it just seemed to me there's a priority focused on people working as opposed to people studying.
If I'm, as I remember it, this was a situation where if somebody's, let's say somebody's in an unpaid internship, but they are working in an affiliated business for an organization, anything from, you know, the aquarium to CSI, and it, as I was thinking about it when you said it, would there be value in creating a remuneration phrase where remuneration could part of it be furthering of their education in, you know, directly related to their interaction with whatever entity they're working for. Because in this situation, as I was seeing it, their pay, to some degree, is the education they're going to get. The relationship is the relationship between the employer and the intern. The only question is it going to be paid or unpaid, and that has nothing to do with us.
All right. And I totally get that.
Okay.
I totally get that. I know that saga about that building, that dorm in Manio, there on Harriet Street, that housed a lot of people that were either actors at the theater there, or they were students at CSI or College of the Albemarle, you know, and I get the need for that. I totally understand, but I just think that if we are dealing with such a limited space for workers and potentially, and their families, to be able to live here and not spend a half a day commuting, you know, that to me is a priority. Totally understand about the students and volunteers. I get that. But we're talking about workforce housing, people that are actually trying to work here, and the demand for that is getting even stronger. As you can see, and you will find out from the survey, that's the number one issue. Not students, not interns. Understand.
But I feel like we're talking about the same thing, you know, and sorry. No, because I work with summer hires.
They're paid.
Who are paid.
Right.
Internships sometimes are paid, sometimes they are not. That is highly mobile. That the ball is being moved on that as we speak. But I look at the value that we get as a community because of our affiliation with these entities that do education, and I guess the question is, maybe would it assuage, would it help if you tethered education to something? Because where I am wondering is, and this is the kind of the divergence of the road that I will certainly agree with you where you're going. If somebody is in education, learning online, and they're going to, you know, a distant location, however they're doing that online learning here, that wouldn't satisfy what I see as a goal. Is that kind of where you're looking?
Well, you know, not exactly. If you're a student and attending classes or working, whether remotely or not, if you're working at a restaurant for, you know, as well to pay for your education or your keep, that's one thing. You're working in Dare County.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not working here, and you're an intern, you're taking a spot that another worker needs. And right now, I think we need to narrow it and come down to people who are working.
I do have a comment on that. Like, interns and students at COA are their workforce to be, you know, that we need.
But we're not sure where they're
Right.
going to end up working.
Yeah, they won't end up here.
I could, you know, I can go to school down here and end up in Richmond
Yeah.
or Norfolk. We need to focus on workers. We need to focus on space for people that are looking to come here to
But
work.
also, I mean, in that same vein, like, okay, person's working remotely, are they working for somebody in New York?
Right, and that was something we had
No,
discussed.
no, I totally get that.
Yeah.
I totally get that, and that's part of my concern.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
part of
So
my
maybe-
concern.
But would you agree?
Because your employer needs to be local.
Would you agree that an internship is work and
No,
education? Okay.
It is not the work that we're talking about, where you're earning an income here in Dare County.
Okay. See,
Well-
that's where I diverge
Okay.
with you.
To me, I think too, a concern would be, since we're, you know, definitely leaning towards allowing entities to purchase these, to own these things,
Yeah.
you could basically end up with dormitories, which is what you were talking about,
Yeah.
happened on Roanoke Island. So, there's nothing to prevent that from happening, so is this something we could consider limiting the numbers of those, kind of like we're doing with retirees?
The other wrench to throw into it too is when I remember when we were talking about retirees, I actually think you brought, or there's a lot of retirees that volunteer at the Y
Yeah.
and whatnot, so.
Right, well, they work too,
Like
right.
for the Fish and Wildlife and.
Right,
they
Right,
but in
so-
order to qualify, first of all, you have to be employed in Dare County and working here. And as you age up and you may retire, you can still live there. Once that turns over, it has to go back to the original purpose, housing for a worker in Dare County. If we start opening up and widening it too much, then we're defeating what we're trying to accomplish.
So you want to strike working remotely as well?
If you're working remotely for a business in Dare County, I think we're focusing on Dare County.
Right, like employers that are Dare County.
Local employers,
based.
Dare County employers, if
Because
you're
then you're gonna
working
get
remotely,
all
you're
these people
working,
that
you're
don't
getting paid to
work
be
for
here,
people
that's
here.
fine.
But your employer needs to be a Dare County
Yeah.
employer.
Dare County employer.
I mean, I sort of agree with that, like, for this, otherwise with that, affordable housing could be another thing, but this is workforce housing.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, somebody to come work for your husband's business, or whatever, scoop ice cream. We need to focus.
And so is
On Dare
everybody,
County,
does
local
everybody
employers.
residing in the unit has to work? I mean, so what happens if one works remotely and one works locally?
If you're working for Dare County employer,
So again, so you have, say,
Have to be one, right, at least one.
I mean, that's what I'm saying, say you have a
yeah,
family where one person works remotely and the other person works locally.
you nailed it,
That's okay,
that's
as
fine.
long as one person.
Is working
So I
for
think
Dare
we-
County.
In my opinion, we do have to, what we're working on here is multifamily, not, we're not really tasked with working on, but we are certainly considering all this, the workforce housing
Right.
stuff and wanting to to,
Somebody going
to
into that
consider
dwelling
that.
unit has to work for Dare County employer.
and then you get into the whole definition of family and all that, which is, I think we've come, we all agree on that.
Right.
So you can have roommate situations,
Yeah,
where you're gonna have, so people,
Okay.
the enforcement's gonna get.
Okay, so this, so the internet, thank God. An internship by FLSA is considered employment. So that fits with what I like. If someone is done, and if you bring local in, if somebody is doing a local internship, they are still, by the Fair Labor Standards Act, that's considered employment. So if
I'm not debating that.
Okay.
I'm not debating that. What I'm saying is, what is the objective here? The objective here is to provide housing, multifamilies, for workforce to come into Dare County and work for Dare County employers. That's it.
Okay.
So we can exclude anybody that we
Well,
want.
there may be legal issues,
Well, there may be.
right?
Well, and that's kind of what I'm saying here, is if you make employment illegal, if you bring that in, the definition of employment includes certain things. So downcast education, internship is considered employment, therefore that distinction doesn't exist in law, it exists in this room. So that may or may not want to be included into this.
Well, I mean, that begs the question of whether or not what I'm saying is legal and appropriate, but my thinking is, we are trying to provide housing for people to come work in Dare County. That's what we should focus on.
Okay.
And not broaden the opportunities for everybody else.
Did you say there was discussion at the workshop about it? About remote work? Did I hear that right?
No, I don't
No?
think there was any conversation about remote work
Okay.
at the workshop.
Okay.
if you work remotely outside of Dare County, would it meet the definition? It says employed in Dare County.
I know, see,
It doesn't say reside in Dare County, it says employed in Dare County.
I mean, you're working,
If you work
but,
for a business in New York, you're not employed in Dare County.
right.
Right.
So you're saying it's already included, basically, by definition, yeah.
The other thing I think about is the seasonal aspect. You know, say a business decides they want to rent some units, you know, annually because they're required to, but they want to provide the units to their employees who are only seasonal. And I know this is splitting hairs on some things, but one of the things that we've talked about is, you know, sharing units. Like if we only needed units during the summer, could CSI rent them in the off-season for
Right.
students? You know, and so that's getting into the splitting hairs of how you interpret all this stuff.
Right,
But I agree with the one person. I mean, it really just has to be one person in the unit employed, because you can't take it any further than that.
right, right.
Also, internship, in my experience with, like, especially CSI interns, we see them because they're working outside of it. But they do an internship during the day and then they work in the evening.
You got it.
Yeah, then you're working.
Then you
Yeah,
work
Yeah.
so
it.
they would be covered.
Yeah.
So,
Very
Um,
rarely, I think we see interns that aren't working somewhere.
Yeah, I
during-
worked in
or, yeah,
college.
or they're paid interns, you know,
Yeah,
whatever, so, if-
a lot of it's paid now.
yeah.
You can get rid of volunteerism and working remotely.
Mm-hmm,
We can also include language that there shall be one qualified occupant for each unit.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
No, that's great.
I'm done.
I know.
I'm off my soapbox
thanks a
now.
lot. We're 10 minutes in, that's fine, no, it's good,
Okay.
that's why we're here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
and it
no,
might be, you know, worth checking
Point.
with the attorney.
We will, I mean, we can go ahead and make the revisions from today, and get it back to Attorney Hobbs,
And see if they're,
and then
you know.
incorporate his comments as well.
But I would agree, volunteer, just pure volunteerism,
Yeah.
you know,
It does
Um,
leave a kind of scapegoat.
right, right. All right, well, thanks, Mee. Okay,
Okay, we'll take care of that one. Let's see, scrolling down. All right, so for the table 7.1, we've made a couple changes here. I might need to actually reduce this a little bit.
Are you left-handed or right-handed?
I'm right, so I'm trying to do it with
Oh
my
my gosh.
She's left now.
left. I'm left now.
It would take me forever to do with my left hand too.
Yeah, I apologize.
It's fine.
So what we did is, just under the headings here, we are calling it large multifamily and small multifamily. So those are two categories. The other thing here is we were kind of working under two concepts, and this goes back to something that Gary had mentioned with regard to, do we need to create essentially a subdivision process, like a zero lot line scenario where each townhome is on its own lot. So we're currently working through that with the town attorney. He's given us some good information. We're processing it now. But so previously we had minimum lot width. But if we're going to have townhome lots, then we need to have a site width as well as a townhome lot width. So that was just the change in that terminology there, which as we hone in more with the attorney on what this process is gonna look like, we can just make sure all the terms are consistent. But change that to minimum width of a multifamily site, thinking that we may end up in a scenario where we have the larger 5-acre site with the 45 lots included within the larger site for townhomes. So that's why that was revised to read site. The 150, the 150 feet is unchanged. Minimum site area, that's unchanged, so 26,000 would be the minimum lot size for your large multifamily developments, and 16,000 would be your minimum lot size for your small multifamily developments. All right, so this next item was kind of where one of our biggest changes fell into place for this. But we are now proposing that we just eliminate maximum site area. Because when we started talking about it, Andy mentioned a scenario of, as it was written, if somebody had a 28,000 square foot lot, well, they couldn't fall under small, the way it was previously written. It would force them to use the large. But what if they had a 28,000 square foot lot? What if they had a 30,000 square foot lot? But they wanted to develop it to the small standards as long as we cap the small. So that's the difference. Before we said if 25,999 is as high as you can go, then you're only going to have 5 units. But if we get rid of that cap or we get rid of that maximum lot size and put a cap on the number of 6, it actually works to someone's benefit to incentivize that small multifamily development over the large. And so I spelled that out in your packet with the revision. If that makes sense to everybody, we can go through some numbers as well to kind of show how that pans out, but it kind of just makes sense to do that. Sorry.
Under the large standard,
Oops.
you would have to have a 42,000 square foot
Yeah.
lot roughly to get 6 units. And under the small multifamily standard, you get 5 point
8.
something units with 26,000.
Yeah.
So you're gonna, okay, make it 6. And that way, if you had a 35,000 square foot lot, you could still do 6. Whereas under the large multifamily standard, you could only do 4. And it wouldn't make any sense to do that.
Correct.
You actually reduce the density if you let people build 6 units on a larger lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Any questions, concerns about that change?
Okay, so nothing has changed with regard to the location of multifamily. Setbacks for our large multifamily, nothing has changed there. At our previous meeting, we talked about making the side yard setbacks for the small multifamily 12 feet, which is the setback in the R1 currently. So just making it consistent with that. And then keeping that increased setback for corner lots. So not a whole lot has changed there. So the next item there is new, location of dwelling structure. Probably doesn't matter that much for a small multifamily development because they're capped at 6. But with a large multifamily development, we just wanted to make sure that in no circumstance you would have a row of townhomes facing the backside of another row of townhomes. So just visually, nobody's having to look into the backyard of someone else. All right, so with density, that is unchanged from where we left it last time. Minimum 26,000 square feet for your first 3 lots, and then 4,500 for each additional lot after for your large. And for your small, minimum 16,000 square feet for your first 3 lots, and 3,500 for each additional unit after. And then here's where we added that maximum 6 dwelling units cap. So for the large, we landed on 60. We talked about that one last time. But the 6 for the small is new. So is everybody comfortable with that? Okay. So
I'm just curious, does the 60, like, does all this line up to allow something to happen on the Kelly site, or is that site too big or too little, or, I'm just curious.
So, I ran the numbers. If this were to be adopted, the for the large, the 26,000 for the first 3 and the 4,500, then they could only get 45 townhomes on that site. They had previously proposed 57.
Okay.
So, but with this new term, with the new.
57 with a 5, did you say? 57?
So if we're uncomfortable with the 60, we can certainly discuss that. But I'll leave that up to you guys.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, but we did talk about it. I think we brought it down from like 90, we're like,
I
60
know.
sounds better than 90. 60 sounds like a lot.
I guess where I am is, when we get into the square footage of the individual units, you have the lot coverage issue, when they start stacking up to max height, and then it comes down to how it will look. What, I guess where I'm interested before I would be completely sold on a plan is, what would that start to look like? With the, if something was developed to density, and you had on this size of lot, smaller versus larger, on existing property within the town, how would that look? And I guess where I dwelling unit is a number, but square footage of unit is a different number. So you start to get, is a dwelling unit that is a single family home? I don't think any of that really matters, but I think what it does is interesting to me when you talk about number of bedrooms per dwelling unit. And when you start to stack that up and you have 45, 47, 40 even, and then you have it with 3 bedroom units, that's a number. And that starts to have an effect. Yes, it is housing, but the other side of it is, that's a lot of mass. That changes one location's effect, and the density is tied to that area, but it's going to affect everything around it as well. So that's kind of where I am, because, and I'm getting back to something that we talked about at a prior meeting. How many square feet is a dwelling unit? Is this dwelling unit are we looking at for this dwelling unit? And what will the lot coverage of it look like? And when it starts to back up against maximum height and architectural things, how will all of that look? I think that might change one side to be something that I think is both advantageous on one side, but also takes it off of the list where it might be more advantageous for the developer. and what would be moving into that unit. Does that make any sense?
I'm
Okay,
not
so
really
my
following.
concern is that people
No.
are starting, my concern is that we'll start to get into the weeds
Not
of,
at
is
all.
this a retirement home
Yeah,
or is this workforce housing? And the difference there is square footage. You know, the reality is when I first, was looking for a house when I was first moving into an area, square footage was important, it was nice, but it was more where it was and did it fit? If it was huge, then that was more advantage to me in the agreement of that. So if it is, my concern is that we'll get into a situation where we're getting really, the places are being slightly overbuilt for the market that we're looking to satisfy, which is workforce. Does that make
So are you saying you want to make them smaller?
I'm thinking maybe, but it really comes down to what is this going to look like when? So we can talk about all these numbers, dwelling units, but I think that where the law of unintended consequences comes into this is what is it going to look like when something is designed for that existing lot in that location in the area. I know that we can't do that, but it's not that hard to extrapolate that out in somebody that does this kind of work. And, other products that we've seen have kind of shown us how that looks and what go ahead.
so are you concerned about density? Are you concerned about the design? Are you concerned about location on a lot?
No, I'm not concerned about location on a lot. I'm not necessarily concerned about density. What I'm concerned about is that if this is written such that it is wide open on how a developer develops it, they can get big multifamily dwelling units on this, and they get more, and that fits what their cost model profile is, but it's not going after what we're going after, which is workforce housing.
We've
Well,
got,
they're gonna be
we've
deed
got
restricted.
architectural design coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's where I think that's going to be really interesting.
Okay,
Right, well,
But that might feed back into this maximum number.
yeah.
That's where I'm going on this. So,
I mean, they're gonna be deed restricted, so I would think that the developers, they're gonna have restrictions. They can't, they can build them bigger than
Yeah.
you might think they should be and all the rest of that, but it's not gonna work, right?
And some encouragement for design standards and
Mm-hmm.
make it attractive,
Yeah.
let's see,
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
continue the
Keep going.
conversation and see
Keep
what
going,
happens.
please.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so the next thing here, talking about height, we did keep both the large and small at the residential standard of max 35 feet in height with the ability to go to 42 if you use an 812 roof pitch. So that's standard with what the town currently has. Also seems to be consistent with what we heard from the survey related to height. We didn't change anything with open space or lot coverage. Just added in here the deed restriction language, like we just spoke about. For the large multifamily, all the units in a large multifamily development shall be deed restricted for long-term occupancy or tenancy. No less than 60% of those units shall be deed restricted for workforce housing. So we talked about that in a previous meeting, but the majority of those units will be deed restricted for workforce. And then obviously that leaves a smaller percentage available for just long-term tenancy or occupancy. And then with the small, because we said, at a minimum, it's going to be 3 units. At a max, it's going to be 6. And all of them are going to have to be deed restricted for both long-term tenancy and workforce housing.
Yeah.
And again, should someone in one of those units retire, the expectation is they would be able to stay in that unit, and then once that it changes hands, it would revert back to workforce. So, unit size, we did talk about this at our last meeting, a minimum of 800 square feet and a maximum of 1,750 square feet. That was a compromise that we came to when we were working on the cottage court ordinance, if you guys remember that with Eddie Goodrich. So at our last meeting, I believe people were comfortable with that, but if not, we can talk about that now. Related to the buffer requirements, and this is something that I did hope we could just take a little bit of time to talk about. So I provided you the section of the code that talks about commercial transitional protective yards. And in there, whenever you have a commercial use abutting a residential use, right off the bat, you're gonna have a 10-foot wide buffer with 2 rows of plantings. But if that use is considered a high impact use, that 10-foot buffer gets bumped up to a 25-foot wide buffer. So if you look at the current ordinance, multifamily is not considered a high impact use. So just my thought process there was the small multifamily, the 3 to 6 units, perhaps we don't consider that a high impact use. That's probably more consistent with what's out there today anyway. But this large multifamily where we have the ability to go up to 60 units, perhaps that is considered a high impact use. Perhaps we do want to amend the section of the code to include large multifamily as a high impact use. So should that ever be adjacent to a residential zoning district or a property that has already been developed residentially, that 25-foot wide buffer kicks in.
I think that's a good idea.
I think so too.
Anybody else? Everybody?
I'm good with
Yeah.
that.
David?
Yeah, I think as well, it might, this is, now I'm gonna get into something else, lighting standard. Like, so if you have this and you're developing into an existing residential area, if in that buffering area you have some sort of overhead lighting, it's going to cast into the residential area, and that's an effect. So I'm wondering if there isn't anything else like that that might want to be kind of thought about, because I certainly agree the buffering is a goal, but what other development of the site might kind of surmount that goal and kind of cast a shadow on what the intention is, which is to have a less impact on the existing residential area.
So I can send you guys the current lighting standards that we have in place today. I don't know it off the top of my head, but there is language in there about how, as far as light spillover from a commercial property to a residential property, it can't be more than 0.02 foot candles, so many feet into the residential property. I don't know the exact number. That's already in there, so it does provide some protection.
Okay.
But we can provide that to you, and you can determine if you feel like just the application of the lighting code as is addresses your concern, or if we need to continue to look at it.
I guess where I'm also thinking about this is there going to be any other, site development things, something like air conditioning, where the noise is going to be affecting area properties. I'm trying to open my head up to that right now. I'm wondering, I'm trying to think about the unforeseen right now. Yeah. And yeah. What is going to be in that buffering area? What maybe this, and actually maybe that's a better way to think about it. What is there going to be more specific design standards for that buffering area so it is more closely accomplished to that goal?
So, like within the buffer area, it would just be vegetation requirements, so there would be no other uses permitted in those areas.
And I got, and so I guess that's kind of where I'm going, maybe, I would, and if you want to just shoot me something on what the vegetation requirements would
Yeah.
look like, and so I'm casting into the Kelly's situation now. I'm thinking about something like Live Oaks, that's wonderful. But what's that gonna end up looking like, as far as when it's developed? If that could be kind of an accommodated goal to maybe look at more resilient plantings so that they grow with the development and reinforce that.
Isn't that already in like all of the?
Yeah. Well, but I think it's kind of left up to you for a sample of what you want to do. So I'm kind of thinking maybe we could reinforce those standards because this is a really specific setup.
So, I mean, and I'll send it out to everybody, but we do, it is specific to the number of trees and shrubs. It's now, they have to be native, percentage has to be evergreen, they have to be 5 feet at planting. So there's some specifics.
Okay, so where I'm going specifically on this is this. Let's say that we have townhomes developed, and I decide to put a fence around the property adjacent to my townhome. I've got a dog on it. That fits into my buffering area. That doesn't really, and when they start to line up to that effect, that's going to load the buffering area with fences. So it's going to push that it's going to push more occupation into the buffering area.
So that's a segue into kind of this larger piece that we need to bring back to you, as Gary mentioned, with the subdivision, with the townhome subdivision. Is that townhome lot going to be just the footprint of that townhome? Is it going to give you a little bit of backyard? Is it going to go to the property line? Where is it going to go? And then setting up the HOA and what amenities are allowed, is fencing allowed, et cetera. So that's, we're aware of
okay, I'm sorry to skew into that, but it's just that's kind of where my head was going when I was starting to look at the way this is lining up.
I think the attorneys provided some great comments, and once we can incorporate those and get that back to you, it will help give guidance. I mean, that can be a conversation that we have next month is,
To be absolutely honest, I'm thinking about Kelly's because I'm going to be driving by it every day, twice a day.
Typically, a buffer area would be held in common open space as part of HOA, so you wouldn't be able to, as an individual subdivided lot, construct a fence within.
And the only addition that I'm going to try to make right now, and then I'll shut up for a while, I hope, is it would be cool if there was some sort of an accommodation in the buffering area designation to make it fit the character of the area and kind of moving it up. I.e., if it's in an area that is heavily wooded, the buffering area should be heavily wooded as compared to, whatever they want to make it to.
so agreed. And both of these, it's a separate amendment, but the large multifamily residential would absolutely be a special use permit, which means we have that opportunity at the planning board and board of commissioners level to look at it and make those recommendations for different types of, if we wanted to create some special conditions with regard to the buffering, we could do it during that process.
That's great. That's a good point.
All right, so we will add large multifamily as a high-impact use, just so it,
I think so. We're in agreement on
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I agree with that.
all right, so here's another one that needs some conversation, architectural design. We've kept it at a minimum of 150 architectural design points.
Yeah.
So looking at kind of that townhome idea that we have in mind, it's going to be a cluster of 6 max, because you could only have a cluster of 6 within your large multifamily, and then in your small, 6 is just the max period. So keeping that at 150 architectural design points. Now, we talked about incentivizing using different types of building variations, perhaps single story, 1.5 story, 2 story, as well as variations in the habitable area within each, as opposed to just making them the stagnant, all of them are 2 story, 1,000 square feet, to have some variations within those. And so at this point, I've just said that that's encouraged, but I haven't really associated that with any type of incentive. So I didn't know if we wanted to talk about that. The obvious idea would be to, we're telling you you need 150 architectural design points. Do we provide an amendment that just providing a variation of this magnitude would right off the bat give you 25 points, or doing something like that would go towards those architectural points? So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that today, or they want to think about that, or if they've got some ideas on how we could better formulate the language to make sure that it's seen as an incentive to do that.
Kelly, just a question. Did you say at our last meeting something about the numbers of, the way the actual developments looked based on the points, the architectural points? It seemed to be at odds with one another. I don't know. Maybe I misheard what you said, but you were surprised to see the reality of what was built out there in the real world versus what the points were designed to do. And somehow I just thought that was interesting to listen to that. That was important stuff, I mean, for me anyhow, I don't know.
Yeah, so, and this is just my perspective, it's no one else's, but we essentially have 2 mechanisms that you can achieve architectural compliance, and one is to just get a stagnant number of architectural design points, and I think we're all familiar with that. It's cedar shake is 25 points, A12 roof pitch is 25 points, gable brackets, workable shutters, they all have a point system assigned to it. And when you look at a residential design manual, the house that's on the cover, like the example, like, yeah, that's great, that's what applying all these points get you. But you see commercial examples within the town where they did achieve their 100 points or their 125 points, and it's just been done in such a way that it really doesn't visually appear to be what it is the town was seeking. I'm not saying that's with every development, but sometimes that happens. And so my thought is maybe upping the number of points required to 150 for these townhomes would better ensure that they have more of the elements. That's not to say that somebody couldn't get those number of points and it still not look Nags Head style. I'm sure they could, but
Yeah,
it maybe gets us a little closer.
And somehow within that, we need to incentivize having variation in design,
Yeah.
you're saying, yeah.
I mean,
totally agree with
incentivize
that.
it
Like,
or
how do we do
require it.
Yeah,
If that's,
require it, maybe. Yeah.
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 Adding balconies,
Can't we just require it?
things like that?
Okay, we can work on some language that
Does everybody agree
would
with
do
To,
that.
to require
Yeah,
variation?
I'm saying yes,
Yes.
amen to everything, you know, increasing number of points and also requiring, you know.
Didn't we require
And we can't require it?
With cottage course, we
Yeah,
required it,
it
right?
makes sense to match that.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's
we
not
did.
incentivation, it's inquiry, yeah.
Yeah,
It was, 1/3 of your units could be X number of stories. It was broken down into 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
mhm.
One
I-
story, half story, 2
Yeah.
stories.
Makes sense to do
I,
that.
I also kind of like that also for the workforce housing numbers in the 60%, if that would also fit, if we stayed with those numbers for decrease, if there was a decrease in square footage, then that definitely fits more workforce housing. It accomplishes the variation as well as accomplishing the goal. But it needs to look great.
It needs to look great.
And,
Is that what you want us to write up?
well, yeah, absolutely. Why not?
Okay.
It truly is one of these situations where we all can leave here and drive down the road and see things that were built where something was designed in verse, in words, and an engineer and an architect took a look at it and said, that's easy, I got that. So that, it's kind of almost like inviting the terrorists into the room and saying, how are you going to take advantage of this situation? And I'm trying, I say that absolutely in comedy, but I'm not, there's a point to it. So I would be interested in comment from, even from Ben, what he sees this looking like as an architect. What could he jam into? Because they're going to be stuck behind an owner of the property, and it doesn't matter aspirationally what they want to do. It's what the owner can get done within the framework.
Can you scroll real quick? I was just looking at the commercial design standards, and it says that if you add more than 10,000 square feet, you have to comply with the building design guidelines, but if you're less than that, you can do the 150.
And I think we decided that they have to all do the residential design guidelines and not the alternative building design. Do you feel differently about that? I mean, we can discuss that more.
Well, I mean, the only reason I bring that up is because the design guidelines were supposed to be less of a formula. Because you guys were just talking about there are projects that have met the points, but didn't really look the way we wanted them to look. And the design guidelines were supposed to give more discretion to the planning board or board of commissioners to say, this really meets the intent of what we're after or not. It's a little bit more discretionary, I guess, in terms of how it's reviewed. That, I mean, that's why the smaller projects were given that opportunity.
Yeah, maybe we do. Maybe we should talk about that more. I know with those guidelines, there's some concern with there's standards. There's like must meets, which are pretty minimal, and then there's recommendations. And so, and the terminology and that is a little, I actually feel there's more flexibility to get outside the box using that. Because there's very few, this is required. There's a lot of, I forget what they're called, there's requirements and then recommendations or suggestions, and there's, perhaps we need to look at that more and determine which one is going to get us the best
Outcome?
Nags Head style.
Mhm.
Kelly, just in terms of incentivizing development to be architecturally compatible and stuff, I was wondering, there was a point in time, I thought, where the town used to measure height. I'm against height. I mean, high buildings, tall buildings are really ugly, I think. But nevertheless, anyhow, I'm just wondering if, in order to incentivize people, measuring roof design does have is a big part of architecture and stuff. So I was wondering, we used to measure height, I thought, at the top, to the top of the top plate versus the very pitch of the roof. And I'm wondering if that would incentivize any of these architects or developers to perhaps, go outside the box a little bit and say, hey, look, if we measured the height like this, then it might give them a little bit more opportunity to put some design into it that they think meets the criteria of the town. Anyhow, it's just an idea. Again, I'm not supporting taller buildings or anything, and I'm not sure about making habitable space in areas, where you allow for some incentive to build, rear roof pitches or whatever that affords people the opportunity to cram people in there. You know what I mean? to actually put people in. So it's like it's kind of a two-edged sword. I don't know, but it is something maybe I thought you may have discussed or talked about.
Yeah, so we actually got away from the top plate language for that reason. It just opened up. We got away from that and just brought it back to 3 habitable floors.
Right.
Period. Because we were getting into, watchtowers and, all these spaces above becoming habitable areas. So, but we can look into that and bring that back. I think it will play into the architectural conversation, and it sounds like we need to go back and review that anyway.
I am interested in that phraseology, especially if you keep the number of the top plate lower than.
I think it was 28.
Yeah, and
prior to us removing it, I think it was 28 feet.
And that might be maybe to have those 2 modes next to each other. You could to me that I can see that might have some advantages, especially to get to the point system, using in the point system or being placed into that rubric.
Okay.
We'll bring that back. And then this last piece, we didn't really delve too deeply into outdoor amenity areas. Typically, an outdoor amenity area is separate from your common area, but I just combined them both for the sake of this meeting. I kind of felt like for our small multifamily developments, we weren't that interested in requiring amenity areas, but for our large multifamily, I didn't know if we wanted to continue that conversation or not. Is there anybody have any thoughts on putting in requirements for these?
No, I have to say that I was up in Currituck County, and we had a problem with this kind of language in a large multifamily development project, which was basically, what happens if the HOA goes under or decides not to manage the space that it's supposed to be managing? And so what was happening is in multifamily and in some major subdivisions, weeds and stuff were growing up. It was totally untaken care of. It was not. So what I'm saying is that I'm concerned a little bit about mandating large multifamily projects for some type of amenity areas. I mean, it's a great idea. It can work, but there's a downside to it too. And I'm just trying to say that I've seen the downside, and it gets kind of ugly. I mean, it's not a good thing. So I think we need to build in a lot of requirements about the maintenance of these amenity areas in the event that something happens to the HOA or whatever.
And would the amenity area be allowed to be in the border area?
In the landscape
In the
buffer?
buffer zone?
Buffer.
Oh.
No,
Buffer area,
typically not.
No.
So,
Or there was,
That would defeat the purpose.
yeah.
Yes,
I mean,
agreed.
something could always get unkept, right?
Sure, but I'm talking about mud holes, huge mud holes. It's like, these things are not, these are problems. I mean, they're not, they're not amenities. Parents would tell their kids, don't go there, don't
Oh,
go,
they're
don't go there.
Attractive nuisance, like,
Yeah,
a
exactly.
dangerous situation.
Situation, exactly. So I am concerned about the long-term upkeep and maintenance of the amenity areas if we're.
With or without
So
amenities.
if they weren't amenity areas, they'd just be
It's like
unkept in the first place? They'd just be?
No, well, true. I mean, I'm not saying that that's probably exactly true. I mean, we have, and just like the town has, grass ordinances and stuff like that. You can't grow weed or grass over so many feet in height or whatever. Same thing is in the adjacent county to us, the same rules. So we went after them for a variety of reasons. It wasn't just the lack of maintenance of the amenity area, but also the other things that were on top of that, which in this case it dealt with, things like weeds and rats and, stuff like that.
So do you not want an amenity area? Or you
Well, I'm
want
just saying we
maintenance
need to be
agreement?
careful
To think
before we
about-
mandate it, that's all.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that it's going to be managed properly long-term. Because, again, I think down the road, we may see that these areas become
Hazardous?
nuisances. Yeah.
And to that, I do think a lot of this is going to kind of get parsed out as we move through the attorney's comments
Okay.
with regard to the creation of the HOA
yeah.
and the maintenance of common spaces and things of that
Right.
nature.
I'm also kind of skewing into a situation, so this is a residential property, but it's really gonna be functioning almost like a commercial property. And you're gonna have a lot of individual decisions being made on how they are utilizing their section of it, which will bleed onto the common space, and just comes down to something as simple as, where are the dumpsters and what does it look like? And then how does that all work if things aren't taken care of? And, and then you place that into a residential community and it starts to get a little weird. I mean, I've got one word, cats.
So that, a lot of that will be the site plan review as well.
Yes.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
A lot of that will come out during the special use site
Yeah.
plan review.
Yeah, I would
Are
think.
you really?
Like,
Oh,
have the opportunity
Yes,
to.
absolutely.
I've got 3 of them.
And I would think is, when we look at the parcels that are available in town, which we did at the outset, to do any of these projects, especially the large ones.
Right.
It's not like they're in, sprawling, urban, it's not like you're miles and miles from anything. I can't think of a single site where one of these could go that isn't pretty close to some kind of a recreation or park area, right? That's in the town.
And
I mean, we have Whalebone Park and we have Dowdy
Well,
Park and we have,
well,
there's
so-
a lot of things close by and the beach and.
So down that road, let's cast ourselves into the box of Kelly's. This is developed as it. Satterfield Landing's right there.
Right.
They're going to be using an environmental road that was designed by the town, that I worked with the town, David Ryan and we all worked on this, as an access egress from the properties back to Satterfield Landing. That's going to mean a great deal of foot traffic, and it's whatever it is, but every one of those people is going, there are effects to all of this. So it's going to come down to, something as simple as is there any code about road cuts for this kind of a setup, Kelly? What their access and egress off the bypass is going to be, how this is going to affect traffic patterns, because
That will all be part of the special
Yeah.
use.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be
I mean-
site specific.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. But, and then sidewalks and how,
It's all site specific.
I think if we take, there's an advantage in starting to understand the unforeseen consequences if we start to use something as the existential eventuality of what would it look like on Kelly's lot. And I know and I'm only saying that as an advisory and as an informed extension of what we're writing. because it's gonna have all that effect there. And, you know, I don't know, yeah, anyway.
All right.
Anybody have opinions on outdoor amenity areas or whether or not we want to go there?
I like the idea of it. I think it does accomplish a lot that we're doing, but I think that there are some minefields that need to be.
There are, but there needs to be, assuming that there are going to be children there, and people, you need to have a place to congregate, you need to have a place to recreate. So I think,
For anybody, yeah.
yeah, I think, you know, I think that definitely needs to be included
In the large ones?
in the large ones
Right.
particularly. And what, you know, that link to what they had, what was it, in Raleigh or someplace, and they had some good examples of being very creative in limited space.
Right.
So that's definite. As we get to that point, I think that's going to be a good conversation. And sidewalks down to the park, if it gets developed there, down Satterfield Landing Road.
All right, so like I said, getting just your general feel on this is helpful. A lot of it will kind of flesh out as we go through the process where the attorney comments on the establishment of the HOA and their role, and
Yeah.
HOA dues and maintenance. All of that has to be spelled out in ordinance form before we even get there. So that's going to be part of this. So I feel like you'll have more direction on these outdoor spaces and amenities and maintenance as we go through that. But I get the feeling that the planning board is interested in us at least exploring those requirements.
Yes.
Okay. And then this section related to the North Carolina Planned Community Act, this is where the attorneys had most of his comments coming from. So don't focus too much on this. This is what we're going to be bringing back to you next month in much more detailed form. So.
Okay.
Okay.
And then just one more thing. It's kind of a big thing. So this is just a draft of what the table of permitted uses and activities would look like. So the first thing up there is multifamily dwelling small. And I have up there both apartment and townhome. So I know originally we were talking about, we prefer townhome over apartments. And I went back and at the planning board and board of commissioners workshop, there was definitely conversation. It seemed as though everybody preferred townhomes over apartments. And in the minutes, it did specify townhomes, no apartments. So I feel like that was probably in the context of the larger developments that we're talking about. And my question would be, now that we've got a small multifamily category, and we know that that category is limited to 3 units to 6 units, are we opposed for the small category to allow a triplex, which would be 3 units? So maybe not necessarily 3 townhomes, but more of what appears to be a single-family dwelling, but it's actually 3 units, a quadruplex. Are we opposed to that apartment style now that we know it's limited to 6 and it would never grow beyond the 6? So that's why I put this in here is, do we want to consider allowing apartment style as well as townhome style in the small category?
I'm good with that.
I mean, it seems to me it would encourage, like, you know, variations in the
that.
design and all that. I mean, you could
Especially
maybe a
kicking it-
smaller unit
Yeah, especially
upstairs.
in the architectural points, you know, especially.
Exactly.
And look more
Exactly.
residential. I mean, you know, we're calling them apartments, but they're not like, you know, stacked,
Right.
you know. I would think it would be good thing.
That's a good
To-
idea.
Yeah, it's a
I
good
like that.
idea.
Okay. And then, so we'll keep that in there and we can spell that out, make that more clear. Is this something that the planning board would recommend being permitted and permitted and obviously meeting the supplemental regulations? Or do you want to see these coming through via the special use process as well?
For small.
For small.
I like special use.
I like special use as well.
Yeah, I do too.
I think also the other thing that this kind of
I mean-
accomplishes is that we're looking at workforce housing. We're looking at a finite number of larger lots. This cuts that up into many smaller pieces, and especially if it's done with a degree of guidance, it could accomplish much more by being more applicable in more areas. As well, it means that the people who would be willing to undertake this don't need to be, the number of zeros is smaller. So that there are more people that might actually attempt this because it's something more. So you could have a smaller business, say somebody owns an ice cream shop, who, who perhaps could maybe knock something like this down, and that might be something they're willing to do.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like special use because it gives a lot more opportunity for discussion.
Yes.
And
Agreed.
every site's
Right.
so specific.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's great. Also with the small, we'll bring this back, we don't have to talk about it right today. But what David was alluding to is, so this just talks about it in context of like a principal structure, but perhaps we also need to explore a mechanism where these small multifamily developments could be an accessory to a shopping center or a group development or, a general retail. So we haven't crafted any language for that, how that looks as an accessory use, but we will. I think now that we've got the small category down and we know what it entails, it's easier to kind of envision what that looks like in terms of multiple principal uses or accessory use. So
Mhm.
that's something we'll need to bring back.
Me too.
That encourages small business.
And then I didn't even leave a question mark. I just said large multifamily is absolutely special use.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I think. Anybody?
No, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And that goes through, that's it. The rest of the packet is just the excerpt for commercial protective yards and the amenity areas. So this was great. There's still a lot of work to do, incorporating today's comments as well as the attorney comments that we received. So we're on a
Still,
good
we made
path.
I think we made some good progress. Anybody, other questions or comments before we move on from our action item?
One quick question, Kelly, and I'm not sure I heard this correctly or not. Did you say that large multifamily they would get they're higher in density, or would be allowed higher densities than would be a small unit or a small dwelling or a small lot? In other words, the larger the property, obviously, the more dwelling units you're going to get on it. I think we maxed out at 60 or something such as that. So what I'm saying is that does large multifamily have an advantage in density versus the small multifamily, given the units, the lot size, or given all that being neutral? Am I making any sense to you?
Yeah, I don't believe so. We've actually increased the lot area requirements for large, specifically to incentivize the small. So let me go back up here to the density. So yes, I mean, obviously because of lot size, they're going to be able to acquire more units, but they have a larger minimum lot size for their first 3, and then it's per 4,500 square feet of lot area versus 35 for the small. So I feel like we're slightly incentivizing the small over the large.
Yeah. because remember we started looking at them and how
Yeah.
scary it was with
Yeah.
all the,
Well, that-
the big
that makes
sites.
it more attractive to a developer.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Okay.
Okay, anybody
That's all I
else
have.
before we move on from multifamily? All right, so Kelly, you get to stay up there and give us a report on BOC actions from November 1st?
Well, I can, but while Andy still has time, I
Oh,
wanted
that's
to see
right,
if he
that's right.
could
I'm sorry.
update on the community
I
survey.
forgot about that, perfect. Yeah, I've been looking at that thing a lot, a fair amount. It's interesting. I'm sure Andy knows it all. Encouraging, yeah. That's how I feel. It's very gratifying to know that we're not out on some crazy tangent.
Yeah.
Do I need to do something on this?
In the survey,
Oh, yeah, that's
yeah,
interesting.
in the survey, yeah.
That was great.
When was the last one of these?
Yes.
Do y'all
Yeah.
remember?
That was really exciting.
Yes,
Wasn't it like a long time ago, 15, 16 years, a long time ago? The last townwide survey?
Last time I remember was '05.
Okay.
It was done as part of a land use plan update. And so, yeah, we did a townwide mailer.
Yeah,
We got about 1,000 back
Huh.
during that one.
that's pretty good. But that's old news. That's,
yeah.
2005.
So has everybody seen this survey report?
Mm-hmm,
Taken a look at it already?
yeah.
I've got a lot of slides here, so I mean, this is an update I gave to the board at their November 1 meeting, but you know, you're probably already familiar with a lot of this, so I can just blow through it if you like, and you can ask me questions. One of the things we're using this for is updating the town's strategic plan, and we had a board retreat last week, and our Commissioner-elect Megan Lambert was there. And we also had Kelly there in attendance, and so we talked about a lot of planning items. And so I can give you a little bit of information about that. We are drafting that strategic plan, and we plan to present that back to the Board of Commissioners, most likely in, I'm thinking February. But, you know, Megan can also give you an update on what they discussed, as well as Kelly. So this is something we started back in July. We concluded it in September. The board, we decided as a group that we wanted to do a random sample, so we sent it to 3,000 randomly selected households throughout the town, including residents and non-resident property owners. However, all the residents did receive one, and it was geographically distributed. We also did an online survey, opened it up to anyone who wanted to participate that were not part of the random sample. In total, we received 1,136 surveys back. And that includes the online survey. We only had about 62 surveys returned to us through the online survey, so not a lot. I feel like most people who wanted to participate were offered to participate through the mailing, and so it wasn't really necessary to have that online survey opportunity. The total response rate we had was about 36%, so pretty good. There's a lot of interest in Nags Head, a lot of passion. So, here's our stated goal for doing the survey. You know, this is going to help us hopefully moving forward as we're planning for budget items, town priorities and projects. And it helps us when we look at policy issues, which is primarily what the planning board does, to have some objective data when we're making decisions and not just anecdotal information. So hopefully this is something we can use to refer back to from time to time when we need to. Here are the topics in the survey, a lot of different aspects of what we do as a town, and certainly a lot of planning items in here. This question was just, I'm just showing you the format of the survey. I'm sure you saw it. Probably most people here filled it out. This is actually a question we asked in 2005, very similar to a question we asked in 2005. We figured we'd ask it again. And on the left-hand side, it asks how important something is to you, your opinion as to how important these items are in the preservation of Nags Head. And then on the right, it asks how well we're doing. The question below just shows you customer service experience. A little bit about the report. We do have the report online. There is a dedicated page on the town's website for the report, and this is just a breakdown of the different chapters of the report. Appendix C is pretty interesting. It's the verbatim responses. It's about 20 pages worth of responses.
That's right.
We can talk about that more.
Read that. Yeah.
In the survey findings section, they have a lot of nice graphs, but they tend to break out, what people responded to in terms of being excellent or good. In Appendix B, it has the tables which show the complete set of responses. So it actually shows you who said that things were either fair or poor or had no opinion, and then it actually removes the no opinion response in a separate table to give you a better picture of who answered the question, how they responded.
Yeah.
These are the different characteristics we asked of the respondents, including geographic area. And this is how we broke down the geographic area within the survey. We asked people to tell us whether they lived in South Nags Head, on the western portion of the town west of 158 or the Causeway, along the ocean front, or between the highways. And so in the future, we can always cross-tabulate the responses for each question based on where people owned property or lived. So this is just one of the tables we included in the summary survey findings. This is the first question about government performance. The company that handled this, Polco, the National Research Center, they tell me that this is a pretty darn good response for a community to get in terms of the quality of services. So those weren't my words, those are their words. But yeah, I think
But you
they
don't mind
felt like
repeating them?
People feel like that Nags Head is doing a fairly good job overall with government services. That's attributed to a lot of people. Planning board, board of commissioners, and staff for years, decades. Again, this is the same question, but in Appendix B, as I mentioned, which shows you the sort of the full breakdown of all the responses, including fair, poor, no opinion, and then the table at the bottom there is the same question, but takes out the no opinion response, just so you can really get into who had an opinion about the subject. So this is a summary graph of the question I showed you earlier, how important something is to folks versus how well we're doing. And so where the lines converge, that means that means we're doing pretty well. So they sort of showed the items at the very top as being most important. Beautiful beaches, obviously, is the number one thing, has been for a long time, and that sort of validates what the town's been thinking. Water quality, very important. Stormwater, very important. Regulating density, very important. You can sort of go down the list, but you can see the items that don't, in the light shade of blue, the lines that don't come as close to the one above it means that we're not doing quite as well managing those topics as we are some of the others.
Density.
So then this table, which is included in the report, just shows in the upper left quadrant the items that people felt were critically important to the town, but we're not doing quite as well. Doesn't necessarily mean we're doing bad, but it's where we probably need to focus on. And so the lower left quadrant would be things that we're not doing quite as well with, but are less important to people. So it's interesting. Regulating development, controlling density is something that came up a lot. Nags had character, managing stormwater, dark skies, enforcing codes. Anyway, so a lot of these things were topics that we discussed quite a bit at the retreat with the board. So priorities, this is how the public responded. At the top, you've got shoreline management, water quality, drainage, protecting open space, and then traffic, wastewater. So basically, they want us to do everything and do it well. But no, I mean, it sort of validates, I think, a lot of the things we've been working on and that we'll continue to work on. The survey also asks about how well each department, or in terms of services, is doing. And so, really gets into customer service on this slide. Why someone contacted the town, which department they contacted, and their impression of their interaction with staff. And then we had some summary of different departments. We asked questions about police, fire, ocean rescue, planning, public works, and so we have some good information about each department and sort of the community's impression. Obviously, we've shared these with each department. We've kind of gone through everything, and they are starting to take their own individual actions to respond to the things they heard. Safety problems, traffic speeding was listed as the #1 thing. We've had a lot of comments recently about traffic, red light running, and speeds. So enforcement is something we're focusing on. Drugs, I think that's sort of an Outer Banks-wide concern, I think has been for years. As you can see, the red light violations. Violent crime at the bottom, not a whole lot of concern about that. There was an article in the Outer Banks Voice about this survey, and you can read some of the comments at the very bottom, and someone said, if someone says that traffic speeding is your worst problem and violent crime is pretty low, then you live in a pretty good place.
Yeah.
Did you write that?
I did not. I would have to agree.
If you had, or
Handle
or
town
somebody in the
manager.
town
Hashtag
seated
town
that, they
manager.
did a good job. Yeah.
They did, yeah. Anyway,
Youth crimes, that's funny.
Right.
keep it all into perspective.
Yes.
Well, especially for a comment category open to comment to the world, to the world of the internet. That's a very, praiseworthy.
Fire department and police department did really well in the responses
Yeah.
here. Ocean rescue also did very well. So
I'm interested right there in back up, fixed stands versus roving patrols. Those are two, and that's a game I ended up playing a while ago where I work. That people are more interested in lifeguards they can see than lifeguards that drive by.
yeah, the problem with the survey is that when you give the survey, you're not able to give a lot of information.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And so do people really know how much service we offer currently?
Right.
We do have 15 stands in the town during the peak season.
Right.
And we also have, I believe, 6 roving patrols between
More.
the stands.
Well, but there's a lot more than that when you kind of put it all into it. I get into it because I recreate in Nags Head and I work in another town, and I do see the differences, and people are constantly advising me of the differences.
I'm sure they are.
What do they say?
I'll sidebar.
Well, obviously, this is something that we can take a look at. We look at these things quite a bit, and I think Chad's probably evaluating these things each year. But we'll have a good distribution of stands. We have a lot of stands in South Nags Head as well, and some of those areas are certainly much less populated than the areas in the northern part of town.
Yeah.
So just having a good sense of the beach populations and where you want to.
Visitors really care about lifeguard stands.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Kevin Zork did a paper a long time ago when he was the chief here, and it postulated in a community like this, what is more important, firefighters or lifeguards? And it strongly supported lifeguards because people want to see lifeguards. They hope they never see the fire department. And that's the difference of this. And kind of filling right into, the Outer Banks now has 2 shoulder seasons. And we are starting to realize that, depending on when you have spring break, it's February. And so all it takes is a good weekend and things can happen. And so in the town of Nags Head, what's an ocean rescue response out of season, in the shoulder seasons?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. We've extended our shoulder season a little bit into the fall, which I'm sure KDH has as well.
Well, but as well, I think, you all have done a better job at having a spring ability to respond. And what I'm realizing is that, that is becoming much more normalized. There's a difference between occupancy rates in the spring and full occupancy in the summer, but we're getting, 85% and up occupancy rates for a large portion of the spring. And what are those people expecting is going to happen? All it's going to take is a decent day of weather. And the majority of the people that visit here that time of year don't care that the water's 57 degrees. They don't. They're going to get in it. So, yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Okay. All right. There's more questions. Sanitation, bulk waste services, you can kind of go through the survey. Getting down into more of the planning-related questions, I think this is something that obviously the planning board is talking about a lot, and the board is talking about housing, affordable housing, came up as being probably the #1 response in the survey, right up there with beaches. When we looked at the verbatim responses, it's probably the #1 thing that people mentioned would be the single most important thing for Nags Head to address. I do find it a little interesting in the responses that while everybody agrees it's a problem, the bag of solutions is pretty narrow.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
Because, I think overall, the impression I get from the survey is that Nags Head needs to stay Nags Head and don't go chasing the shiny object because you may not get it and you might sacrifice more than you wanted to get it.
Right.
And so be careful. And so I think with all these things we're talking about, whether it's housing or ADUs or multifamily, we have to be really thoughtful about how we address the solutions.
Yes.
Right, because
try.
44% of respondents said, I don't think housing density should increase.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And probably density in general. And going back to some of the original slides, talking about density and over occupancy is a major concern.
Well,
so.
and I would be interested in delving into that over occupancy. What does that really mean? And, because I think it could go 2 different ways. We're talking about, an oceanfront house where every horizontal space is occupied, or does this branch into ADUs and residential communities and an over
What, when
occupancy?
over occupancy, or does it just mean there's just too many people here?
Exactly.
I think a lot of people.
Yeah, and
The over occupancy question, it just means it's too crowded.
right.
I don't think, people
Yeah.
are necessarily referring to anything specific even.
Well, but
It's more of a feeling.
Right,
right.
right,
Well, but I wonder if
I think.
specific, if there are any thoughts of specificity, because one of the things that I have realized is that there was an area of my responsibility that used to be very much unoccupied. ADUs have completely occupied that area now, and people, which would have been back in the day ADUs. I'm saying Airbnb. That wasn't prescribed prior to this, but really isn't an Airbnb, an alternative dwelling unit, that wasn't allowed for when these communities were designed. So, you know, it is having an effect right now. That would be, yeah. I think it's having more of an effect on services.
This just talks about development types. This is very similar to a question we asked in 2005, and I feel like it's fairly consistent in the responses. Everybody has a good picture of what Nags Head should be. So obviously you've got single-family dwellings at the top, and then small-scale commercial right below that. Anything really large is way at the bottom.
Hotels are really low, yeah.
And hotels is sort of at the bottom too. Which is interesting since we had a big push to try and encourage hotels back in
I know.
the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And that's one thing we talked about with the board at the retreat and the hotel overlay.
Does that also, could that also be because what was a hotel when we were talking about that was one thing, and a residence wasn't what we're seeing now? You know, just the much larger rental properties.
I think there's definitely been some change in
Shading.
perception of what's happened. I remember back then, we hadn't gotten a hotel in a long time, I think since 1985. And the ordinance was very restrictive. You know, to build a hotel not on the ocean front, you had to dedicate a beach access. You had to build a beach access and dedicate it, you know, to the hotel occupants, which was very expensive to do. And with some other standards we had, you weren't gonna see any new hotels. It just wasn't cost effective. And we had the Restaurant Association come out and say, well, if things keep going the way they are, we'll end up with nothing but single-family vacation rentals, and everybody will go shop and cook at home on their vacation, and nobody will eat out anymore. That was one thing we heard a lot. And then you had the Visitors Bureau say, well, hotels is really the entry point for first-time visitors. People come and stay in hotels, and then they may stay the next time in a vacation rental. And so you need that diversity of accommodations. You need a nice mixture. And so the board at the time felt like we needed to find a way to incentivize hotels. And okay, the question was, what would it take? Like, how dense does it need to be in order for a developer to actually do it? And so the hotel overlay was the idea that they came up with, and that obviously is from the village south through Whalebone.
Of course, neither one of those groups saw into the future and saw Airbnb
Right.
coming.
Well, and I think that some of those things
Yeah,
haven't really
yeah,
played out the way
yeah.
people think. I mean, we obviously have a different problem than what was anticipated. We don't, people would probably say now we don't have enough restaurants, and the ones that we have, you can't even get into.
That's,
Right.
that's,
So-
And now we have a lot of people eating out because they're coming for short stays.
Right.
And parking's a
Airbnbs, you know,
problem.
but yeah.
And so some of that hasn't held true. And so I guess one of the questions for the board is, you know, how strongly do we really need to encourage hotels anymore? And in this question about 60 feet was something we asked, and overwhelmingly people said they thought it was too high.
Right.
And so I think that is something that will end up coming back to the planning board for more discussion. So, and then, obviously, I think it's no surprise that building heights were very important to maintaining Nags Head's character. We've fairly well maintained our height limitations over the years. Hotels was really the big change, and, you know, I think that's an example of chasing the shiny object. I mean, we made that big change for hotels. You know, here we are 20 years later, we haven't really seen a whole lot of hotels. And, you know, would the community be happy about what they saw if a hotel was built to that height? You know, and I don't know. I mean, that's what we're trying to figure out.
Right.
This really spoke to some of the land use and code enforcement issues and how people felt about those. Obviously, over occupancy of vacation rentals was at the top. And as Megan said, you know, we didn't really ask what they meant by that. but our impression is just a general feeling. And we talked about this a little bit at the retreat. You know, what do you notice about it? You notice traffic, and you notice a lot of cars at homes, sometimes overflowing, you know, onto adjacent properties or onto the street. A lot of trash cans, a lot of overflowing trash cans. And so I think that's just a feeling of congestion. And then later into the season, certainly, you know, we've seen that. Residential light spillover, this is a topic that has come up from time to time, and the town has not really taken any kind of aggressive approach about dealing with this. We did talk about this with the board. So there may be an attempt to do something about this, more from an education or non-regulatory approach, but that could change. I think that is being debated a little bit. Septic failures was a concern, and we saw on another question that majority of people that responded were not familiar with the septic health program, which was surprising. There it is.
And there was another question too that surprised me, rated kind of low, about opportunities for engagement with the town. And people thought it wasn't strong or whatever. I just, you know, I don't know how you bridge that gap where people think, you know.
It's also really interesting to me that the town is as well supported in this survey, yet this town is seen as difficult to deal with you know, within the community when it comes to development. And those, I think, are at odds, and I'm not sure that there isn't a chance for the town to kind of celebrate a success here and try to see if there is room in that disparity to create context for why and what that means. And is it just because we don't like them, or is there a tangible reason for it?
When you say difficulty to deal with, where are you getting, what do you mean by that?
It, you know, still, you know, in a development
Oh, from a
setting.
builder, not from.
Builders,
I
or-
saw the
or-
opposite of that in the survey.
The survey, right, me
Yeah,
too.
that's
But
kind of,
builders, it's builders.
Okay.
it's not only builders, I think it's also people who own properties looking at their properties saying, well, I can't do that, I live in Nags Head. It isn't, it's owners looking at what can be done. And I think that there's perhaps room to create dialogue on what the difference of those two things means and what they actually mean, and maybe that's room for interaction between, you know, for opportunities for involvement. Planning
Megan,
board.
you've heard of the word, the state of Nags Head, correct?
I
Oh, yeah.
have, but I've heard that, but it's usually coming from someone trying to develop.
Right,
Right,
exactly.
right.
I refer to it as Republic of Nags Head,
But I thought the survey results in
I
terms
like
of
what
our
I hear.
staff was very.
I don't know, certainly,
Yeah.
certainly,
why our town looks
but
nicer.
that's kind of what that's what I find is really interesting. For residents, they see it as good.
Yeah, I've heard
But-
hard to build here,
Just
but
don't
love
even
to
wanna
live
work
here.
there.
And I think that is
They don't want
that
to build there, okay, all right, well, that's okay.
this is kind of what I'm saying is that, you know, to Gary's and a town that says no is a good town to live in.
Right.
And maybe there isn't an opportunity in that for PR, Mr. Gorman.
There is definitely an opportunity for education, you know, and we've talked about this before, you know, what is it, you know,
Just say no.
what is giving that
Just say
impression? You know, is it our interactions with staff? Well, I don't really think so. I mean, I think it's the environment we're in. It's a complex environment, and you've got zoning laws to deal with, you've got the building code to deal with, you've got coastal management, and you've got flood. You know,
Right.
there's layers and layers of
Okay.
things you have to deal with on the Outer
They
Banks.
just blame
and
it
so-
everything on the town.
Education is
Even-
critical.
And so, I mean, the town has always been fairly precise in terms of making sure we abide by all the things that we're supposed to. And so that may come across as being difficult, but, you know, I mean, I think everybody's
looking at things fairly closely and making sure that we're not overlooking anything that we're supposed to. We're not shirking our responsibilities, and so.
What I can say is what we've got is so much more than what we can lose if we lose it, and when we lose it, we won't have it anymore. That's kind of what I'm seeing in this.
But I think one of the things that's happened, a little plug for staff, is that, we try to help people get through their permitting process and help fill things out and get the correct information, and then we've been turning things around quickly. And so that, we're trying not to be the problem.
Yeah.
The survey definitely shows that.
Yeah.
Right.
too.
Yeah.
So anyway, just finishing up here, it was surprising people were interested in supporting protecting the Sound shoreline.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I mean,
But no, I know I can, am surprised. I mean, it's pretty,
my impression was always that, the ocean is public trust, and so, we're gonna spend money there. Sound
Right.
is more private, so people would be less inclined to support that, but that's not what these responses are saying. And then, people feel pretty good about water quality in the ocean, but the Sound probably less so. This is about traffic and transportation. We talked about these things quite a bit at the retreat. One of the things that is interesting, we've had a lot of comments lately about red light running. We've had requests from neighborhoods to have signals installed, and those get sent to DOT. And we know DOT has a very data-driven process to determine when a signal goes in. So we feel like we pretty much know what the answer is going to be a lot of times when we send it to them. And then how often are we going to just keep sending requests for signals to DOT and having them rejected? But that's not really a long-term solution, I don't feel like. And the Dare County Comprehensive Transportation Plan, which was adopted by all the towns in, I believe, 2010, its recommendation for 158 was to turn it into a boulevard, and it would be a separated roadway facility. And DOT has talked for years about doing a corridor study, which is supposed to be in their TIP, yet Joe recently called DOT to have a conversation about that, and they're saying that's probably 10 years away. And so how do you move the needle on these things? Because that's really the kind of thing that needs to happen to make any significant progress on this issue. And so we talked about that a little bit at the board retreat. But those are the kinds of things that probably take more political effort than maybe what we're spending, and getting together with the other towns and really paying attention to that. But sort of predicting that we'll keep having the same issues come up until we really move the needle on some bigger efforts. So a lot of comments about various things there, and then pedestrian facilities is also in there, and that's important, and we continue to include those in our CIP and prioritize those things. I think this is what Megan was referring to. Where do you get most of your information? Website still pops up as the top thing, and then preferred channel of communication, email. And we do have an email broadcast that anyone can sign up for and receive weekly emails as well as updates. And our website includes, on any of the departmental pages, you can choose to elect to receive information feeds from those pages. So if there's an update to our sanitation schedule, you can customize it to get an email about a change to the schedule. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and some people know about it, probably not as many as we'd like. And this gets into that open-ended question: what is the single most important change or improvement to suggest to the town of Nags Head? As you can see, the number one response, or most frequent response we had, was for affordable housing. And then quickly behind that was beach nourishment. It's probably worth going and reading some of the comments.
Yeah.
There was an interesting comparison to some of our neighbors in there. And you know, I'm not gonna say it out loud, but, you know, we were talking about this at several recent meetings, including the retreat, how years ago, Gary remembers this, we always talked about Myrtle Beach and Virginia Beach and not wanting to be like those communities. And, you know, we adopted ordinances, almost 20 years ago to regulate the size of homes. And it's interesting to see now, you can sort of see how that's played out.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see some local examples to really see what could have happened
Mm-hmm.
if we hadn't taken those actions. So I think people feel like that's fairly satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it speaks to good planning. So, anyway, as I mentioned, we had a strategic planning retreat last week, and we're gonna be working on drafting a document to present back to the Board of Commissioners. We'll present that to the planning board as well, and to the public, and then from there, hopefully we adopt that and then use that to focus our efforts on things we would bring back to the planning board, and also for our budget and CIP in a future initiative. So that's a summary of our survey results. You know, a little bit, some of the things that the board talked about that were planning related, and Kelly, you can certainly step in here, but you know, we sort of presented a list of the things that we would want to suggest to the board that were planning related. So residential lighting is something that came up and we'll probably talk more about. Taking a look at where our comprehensive plan and our zoning ordinance may not be aligned. And this kind of goes to the hotel overlay question. There's probably other things that exist. You know, we haven't had certain projects come forward, developed in a certain way to really highlight maybe what some of the problems are, but I think the C5 was an example of that. You know, that's something that probably needed to be addressed that hadn't been, and it really took something to come forward to really say, okay, is the zoning in our comprehensive plan aligned with community expectations? And so are there things that, if developed under the way the ordinance allows, would people be satisfied with those results? And so I think the goal is to try to identify what those things are and bring them forward so we can be more proactive about those things. You know, one of the, we keep bringing up this example, but when you guys worked on the C5 district, you know, there was a specific thing that was brought up about fueling stations.
Yeah.
And, you know, the fueling stations we have in town are fairly small. Now, we know there's a fueling station going in our neighboring community that's gonna be large, near the Target. And one of the larger lots in Nags Head, just a couple of years ago, was under contract to put in a large fueling station from Royal Farms. Now, that never happened because of COVID, but I think that that location for that use and that much traffic would have been a significant concern. And so when the Planning Board and Board of Commissioners and Kelly worked on the fueling station ordinance, they did it for the C5 district, and then they decided to go ahead and expand it to the rest of the town. So you probably won't see anything of that magnitude happen in Nags Head. And so that's another example of what we hope to try and address, looking at how our land use plan and zoning ordinance are aligned, and also thinking about community expectations and using the information from the survey to help inform that. Anyway, there's probably some other things I left out. Anything you want to highlight?
The character area conversation.
In the comprehensive plan, there was a series of character areas in chapter 2, and one of them was Bonnet Street, that area, and looking at sort of encouraging more activity in certain nodes in the town. The other was Whalebone. And we talk about certain properties that are developed, have been around a long time in these areas, and if they were to convert to just residential use, how it could change the character of these areas. And so we'll probably start talking about some of that as well, you know, how we might affect what happens in these areas. So anyway, questions or comments?
I think It's really interesting. I've enjoyed.
Andy, I would like to ask you one question. I mean, your background is in planning. You're a planner, basically. How do you, when you look at our zoning map and you look at our hotel overlay district, do you see any issues with that? I mean, from your perspective, from a planner, not from an administrator, or not from the town's perspective, but from your disciplined perspective. I mean, when you look at this, is this something that you kind of support? Do you think this is a good idea for the town? I mean, I hate to put you on the spot, but at the same time, I think it's important because you give people, you know, some direction, some wisdom about, you know, what's happening down the road. And I'm curious about, you know, how do you look at this? How do you look at this hotel overlay district? I have some heartburn with it, but that's just me, you know. So I'm wondering about how you look at it from, you know, an administrator's point of view and a planner's point of view.
The hotel overlay,
Yes.
it's not an easy question because I think you really have to think about what your goals are and what the community's goals are before you can really figure that out, you know, because we would always direct, you know, suggestions or recommendations based on community goals. And, you know, back in the early 2000s, stated goal was to increase the number of hotel rooms. So we drafted an ordinance that tried to do that with guidance from the board. And so, you know, now we've got the results from the survey, which sort of says, well, maybe we got a little too aggressive with that. So, you know, I would take a look at that personally before we came up with any recommendations. But, you know, when I think of Nags Head, you know, I think of a certain character, and something of that magnitude probably doesn't fit in with the character I would think of. You know, and how important is it to the economy? You know, I don't know.
Where are they gonna eat?
Yeah, I don't know if it is.
Well, obviously, it's not our beginnings, so to speak. You know, we're founded, as the survey said, it's pretty much single family. I mean, that's what we're about, you know. We're trying to do essential housing right now, and we're getting into that. But the hotel concept, even though, you know, it's 20 years dated, I'm still kind of, I don't know, I'm just still not comfortable with it. I just feel like there's something amiss there, you know. And I was just wondering, you know, from your perspective, where you are with it, obviously, you know. So, and I understand your answer. I mean, I mean, it depends on, you know, where you are in time and how things have changed, you know. And I see it's changed a bunch. So I'm just hopeful that we'll address it sometime down the road as a board, as a planning board.
Well, a few years ago, we developed a new ordinance for cottage courts, you know, and we hadn't had cottage courts since the mid-'80s. And so we decided to try and encourage cottage courts, and we've gotten a few since we did that. And then hotels, you know, well, historically we had smaller hotels, mostly motels.
Right.
And, you know, the old cottage courts look a little bit different than the ones we're getting now. So we really have to be careful on how these things end up playing out, you know, because what's gonna happen in the future and what people are gonna do is gonna be different than what people did in the past.
Right.
You know, so it's not gonna look exactly the same. Is it gonna have the same character? Especially with, you know, to try and maximize the site, you're always gonna put parking under the building, so that's gonna put it up a story. And then, you know, you've got flood regulations to deal with, and so things are gonna go up. And to me, some of these old places, the charm and character of it is being sort of at grade level. But I mean, that's very hard to regulate, stuff like that. Human scale, I guess, you know. Nag said the old houses were typically only 3 or 4 feet off the ground, and that was where the first floor began. You didn't have the primary living space, the whole story up.
How tall is the condos at Sugar Creek?
That's probably 45 feet. The ordinance allowed up to 47 from grade. But see, we're talking about 42 feet measured from BFE, or, well, if there's no BFE, it would be great, right? Yeah, or 9. So, yeah, the ordinance is different, but it's because the measurement point is different.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you for
Thank you.
thank you for the
You'll
information on
hear
the
more about
survey.
all this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think it's interesting. I think it's sort of validating. It should be for y'all,
Found it
staff.
Very encouraging.
Yeah, you know, so.
Andy, was there anything that surprised you, really stood out and surprised you on the survey result?
No, not really. I mean, I was surprised not more people knew about the septic health program.
Yeah.
But, you know, so part of what you hope for is that it validates the things you've been doing and make sure that you're still on the right track, or that you have been on the right track. And I think it does some of that to a degree. So that's
I
also
agree.
helpful, I mean, just for that fact.
Yeah.
So, but definitely highlight some things we need to work on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now Kelly, will you give us an update on the BOC actions for November 1st?
Yes, I don't have a
Please.
whole lot. Connor Twitty, who's their environmental planner and septic health coordinator, got his 5-year recognition, which was great. And even though there's a lot of people that don't know about the septic health program, I do think Connor's doing an amazing job and really getting it out there right now, so that's exciting. The Board of Commissioners selected their Earl Murray Jr. Employee of the Year, and they selected Stephen Anderson from the police department. So if you see him, give him a congratulations. We had several things on the consent agenda. The subdivision waiver for the Makita subdivision, the amendments that were related to drive-throughs in mixed-use developments, and the text amendment pertaining to cash converters as an accessory use to retail jewelry shops. That was all on consent agenda, and that will be going to the Board of Commissioners December meeting. And I think that was it. The only other thing I had highlighted here was what Andy just updated the board on, which was the community survey. So that's all I have for that.
Okay. Questions, anybody on that? Town updates? Your
I
director's
don't
report,
have any.
Hmm?
Yeah, we can go through the director's report quickly.
please.
Let's see. Gosh, it's just painful to watch. Sorry. All right, so as always, I don't need to update you guys on what you've been doing. The Septic Health Committee, there we go. The Septic Health Committee did meet a couple weeks ago, and the primary thing that came out of that meeting was there are some changes occurring at the state level as it pertains to septic systems, repair areas, all that good stuff, which we later on received an update from Josh Coltrane with the Dare County Health Department. He has a really good grasp on what's happening. Essentially, for both residential and commercial properties, if you had pre-treatment designated as your repair area, well, for residential right now, if your conventional system were to fail, 9 times out of 10, you could repair it in the same location just by turning the sand over, maybe getting it out of the water table, you can put it back in the same place. But when you had your system permitted, if you designated an area on site as pre-treatment, like an advanced system, and your conventional system fails, you are now required to go to pre-treatment, which is going to be a very expensive endeavor for a lot of people. Similarly with commercial businesses, especially any commercial business with a grease trap, if their system begins to fail, they're going to be forced to immediately go to an advanced system, which is going to be very costly. It's my understanding that the Dare County Board of Commissioners and the county manager, Bobby Outen, are working on getting some amendments to these legislative changes. And I think our Board of Commissioners has said they would certainly tag team on with that and help provide any support needed so that hopefully we can get those regulations amended or changed to allow for some more flexibility on the local level. So that's kind of the big thing there. The EV action plan, I will actually defer to Joe. He's really dug into this. He's been having a lot of communications with EvoCharge and whatnot, so he can probably update us if you're comfortable with where we're at on that. And just to finish up, sand relocation, we are in the midst of that. It's pretty busy, getting lots of applications in, and we have Connor Twitty and Ed Snyder doing our site visits, meeting with contractors. I think we're up to about $100,000 in the Dune cost share program being allocated, and Dowdy Park holiday market coming up on Saturday after Thanksgiving, the 25th. So there'll be a market from 9 to noon, and then at 5 o'clock, Santa Claus is going to be there for the tree lighting. So 5 to 7 at Dowdy Park. If you can make it, that would be amazing. That's all I've got. And so if Joe wants to give a little update on the EV piece, that would be great.
Hello, good morning. With the EV chargers, we've been considering getting the equipment from 2 different providers. Low Wire, who was the contractor who would basically be doing the install and the maintenance, recommended we go with EvoCharge. So we've been communicating with EvoCharge. Currently, we're sort of dealing with some technical issues regarding whether or not we need, which we recently got an answer on, sort of, we're going to have it hardwired to our town electric, so the electric chargers would be hardwired into the parking lot and charged through that system. But the equipment would be cheaper if it could only depend on our Wi-Fi. But it seems like basically our contract with our current Wi-Fi provider, and you know, if it did go down, if our Wi-Fi went down, how that would affect our sort of requirement to keep that those electric chargers working all the time. So we would need cellular, them to be cellular equipped, basically for the reporting, sort of managing how much power the chargers basically give per day. So basically we're working through the technical details with EvoCharge on what equipment we need to meet the specifics of the grant, the $10,000 reimbursement we've grant through the NCDEQ. But that's recently been sort of figured out, and so now it's really about, another requirement was having a 5-year warranty. They only offered a 3-year warranty, so they've offered us an extended warranty to meet the grant requirements, but we still need a maintenance plan with that would also be 5 years to meet the grant requirements with the contractor who would install them. So basically we're working out the specifics of the between ordering the equipment to make sure it meets the grant, and that once we get it and installed, it also has to meet ADA. I know there was originally 2 spaces that was planned to have the chargers, but it was, you know, based on the sort of ADA guidance and the design, you need a aisle that would come through the middle. So if, you know, it's not regulated where the charge point is on a vehicle. So if someone was a handicapped person and pulled in, and you know, maybe their charger's on the rear left, if there were 2 tight spots, they wouldn't basically be able to get to the plug and plug it into their vehicle if there wasn't sort of like you'll see like the van aisles. So the lot would need to be, the spaces would need to be designed in accordance with that guidance.
Right.
So we're working through that currently, and hopefully by next meeting we'll be able to have the equipment ordered, and hopefully have the maintenance contract updated with the local contractor, and hopefully installation and would follow, and it would come online pretty soon after that.
When do you think that might happen, Joe?
I mean, I think really now it comes down to getting that maintenance contract in place with the local contractor. I haven't dealt with him at all, so I don't really know whether he'd be open to that or what that looks like. But it really depends on that. If it could be, if he gives us that, that's sort of the last piece we need, and then we can order the equipment and based on his schedule, be able to install it. So.
Before next summer?
Oh yes, definitely. Hopefully in the next couple months.
Would be great.
Okay.
So I don't know if there
Thank
are
you,
any
Joe.
other questions.
Anybody
Great.
questions on the EV plan? Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
One thing I should have asked somewhere along the line, is there any word yet? Weren't we supposed to hear in November about the estuary and shoreline grant?
Yeah, we haven't heard back.
Haven't heard yet? Okay. You'll let us know, I'm sure.
Yes,
Okay.
David Ryan will let me know.
Okay, so we'll move on. Is there anything, anybody have anything on their members' agenda for today?
I'm very happy with the survey and kind of what it's saying. One of the things I thought was interesting that was even highlighted in your bit was beach driving, and how there was a special asterisk at the bottom of that, which shows, 32% had no opinion, and no opinion is interesting. And so is there too much driving on the beach? It's already kind of supported because you can't drive in a large section of the town. It kind of supporting that the town is moving away from it's more of a beach-going situation as compared to, fishing. Fishing on the beach is still a big thing, but there's so much accessibility that driving to the beach for fishing isn't what it once was. And maybe, maybe decreased accessibility as far as you can't even drive on sections of the beach kind of supports, could we make the season shorter for beach driving?
So this is just a comment, or this isn't
Yeah.
something you want us to
No.
work on? Okay.
No, I mean,
Okay.
I don't think we have a dog in the fight, to
Right,
be honest, but,
right. Okay.
but I just kind of, the community is maturing, and what's that doing? It's changing a lot of stuff.
Right.
And then the other bit was, there's a lot of room in this survey to talk about ADUs.
ADUs?
Yeah, what it is, it actually said, over occupancy, you could look at ADUs, unenforced duplexes, that could be ADUs. So there's a lot of, threads which could be pulled direction of ADUs.
Mm-hmm.
There'll probably be more about that too.
Stay tuned. All right.
Stay tuned. Okay, anybody else? So I did want to say and thank Megan for all her dedicated service to our new commissioner-elect. Thank you for all your dedicated service to the planning board, over 5 years, I think, and for being the vice chair for the last year or so. We're going to need to replace Huriel next month in the vice chair, but thanks and good luck, and stay in touch with the planning board. Don't forget your roots.
I will. I also want to say thank you to everybody here. It has been over 5 years, and I can say that I've learned something from every single person in this room. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you to Chair Vaughn for your leadership and your guidance. Very proud of the work that we've done over the last 5 years, and very confident that you guys will continue to do.
So thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Can I get a motion to
Motion
adjourn?
to adjourn.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.
And you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
You too. Oh, yeah. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. We